Thank you for that. Kenny FOLARIN, let me bring you in right now. I hope you can hear us loud and clear. Kenny, are you there?
Absolutely.
Okay. Tech will play a video introducing you in a few seconds, and then the mic can come over to you.
Kenny FOLARIN is a strategic leadership expert, a certified management and organizational consultant, a master black belt, a conference speaker, a success coach, a facilitator, a thoughtful teacher, and a minister. His passion is to see leaders stand up and lead with more power and impact, and his speaking and leadership experience spans over 25 years. He has served as the Chief Operating Officer of Daystar Christian Center. He is currently the CEO and Principal Consultant of Harold Global Consulting. Ladies and gentlemen, make welcome to GPAD 2021, Kenny FOLARIN.
Welcome, Kenny. You have a lot of, there's a huge responsibility on your shoulder, given what we've had with leadership and growth and governance. So please give us hope here how we can leverage our power for further development and for betterment of our continent.
Thank you very much, Faith. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I want to say a big appreciation and thank you to the organizers of GPAD. Thank you for your leadership and the great things we're doing. It's so good to be here at GPAD 2021. This is a very important and vital platform and forum that makes a lot of contributions to this region in terms of economic integration, democracy, health, and so many other things. I'm excited to be part of this conversation this year. I also want to appreciate all the previous speakers and keynote speakers, our vice president, the ambassadors, and everyone that spoke. Excellent point, spot on. I mean, great contribution from everyone, the engineer. Thank you for making this conference a worthwhile experience for every one of us. So I'll be speaking on the prospect for sustained growth in Africa. And I hope my point will encourage every one of us to take the challenge and move forward and do something with respect to Africa. So I'd like to share my slide as I begin. The prospect for sustained growth in Africa. I want to believe, as I start, by establishing the fact that Africa is one of the richest, or perhaps the richest piece of land on earth, given its natural resources, the rich fertile lands in Africa. We have precious mineral resources. Our diversity is so huge, and we have so much to talk about, to pride about in Africa. But in spite of all of these, the majority of Africans live in abject poverty condition. And the question is why? Why do we have all of this happening in Africa? I mean, it's simply the failure of leadership. Like so many of us have alluded to, leadership has actually failed to promote the common good. I mean, of every one of us in Africa, the resource distribution to help in ensuring that these resources goes to everyone in Africa. The lack of transparency, accountability, and independence of judiciary constitutions or system is part of the challenge that we have in Africa today. But I want to say this as I begin by establishing the fact that with all the programs that we have in Africa that has been established in Africa, I mean, all these programs have economic impact. Their primary focus is to bring some growth to Africa, like the structural adjustment program, privatization, currency devaluations, and the rest of them. All of these things still fail to alleviate the problems that we have in Africa. But currently, they still worsen the fortunes of many Africans and make more Africans to be poorer than they used to be in the past, even before these programs were initiated. But I'd like to say this, that the country of Africa is one country that is so huge. The continent has huge young individuals, energetic individuals, young people, innovative, hungry people for jobs, for opportunity. And I stumbled on these statistics that by 2025, more than half the population of Africa will be under age 25. And by the year 2050, 1 in 4 people on earth will be African. That should interest you that we have huge opportunity ahead of us. And we should be excited that Africa is going to play a crucial role in the transformation and the changes we're going to experience in the world. Let me also remind us, ladies and gentlemen, that Africa is poised to become one of the world's most important economic regions eventually, as we embrace our responsibility and the challenge that we have from this conference. The challenge we face today are undeniable. As much as possible, we all know them. The disruptions we have faced, the insecurity we have in Africa, all of these are caused by terrorism and the armed groups and all of those things. But having said that, on a lighter note, I like us to understand that Africa is so blessed. We have a lot of good brains. Our cultural influence is amazing. It's something that draws attention to the entire world. The fact speaks for itself. In short, the things that happens in Africa is always felt around the world, everywhere around the world. Anything that is happening in Africa is always a talking point across the nations of the earth. I mean, is it the issue of who owns the best jollof rice we want to talk about, or any other thing? But every occasion and the things that happen in Africa always creates and gains national or international attention. So I like to say this to encourage us of the fact that we're doing well, but we can do better than where we are today. So I like to draw attention to some challenges that I think are issues creating the setback that we have in Africa today, and also provide some recommendation that I think will help in taking this conversation forward. And some of these challenges, the first one that I like to draw attention to is governance and the role of citizens. I mean, many of our speakers today has mentioned this. It's an essential component that we need to be aware of. The promotion of the common good and the protection of its citizens, governance and the role of the citizens. I mean, we like to mention that our leaders must be interested in seeking the good of all their citizens. And how do we go about this? Formulating policies and applying the laws. Currently, what we have is that both the laws and the leaders are not transparent, and they need to be transparent and accountable. Like engineer said, our leaders must uphold the principles of subsidiarities, and that is government and leadership must not arrogate to themselves the function of the lower bodies. So governance and the role of the citizen is one major challenge that we need to be aware of and confront head on before we can move on in addressing the issues that we have in Africa. The second one is our politics. Our politics. I mean, politics today is not played as a local affair. The former United States speakers of the House noted something, and he said, Africa, he said, all politics is local. All politics is local. African leadership or government have failed to understand this, that politics should be local. I mean, politics in modern Africa today is centralized in the hands of only few people. And the majority of the citizens are alienated from the process of the governance. And from this government or these government individuals, they take the governance into their pocket and assume all the responsibility with impunity. Leaders in countries in Africa do not take the cares and the concerns of the citizens so much and do not even allow the citizens to practice politics. That is a challenge that we must confront. Another challenge I want to bring our attention to is the foreign aids and interference. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that foreign aids that comes to Africa impact on Africa in a very negative way? These aids have strong ties attached in favors of the donors. You will see corporations contracting foreign aids, making millions of dollars from the foreign aids, even dodging taxes, expatriating the money abroad. That's what we experience. In fact, many of these foreign aids even facilitate corruptions in Africa right now. And the point is, the donors are actually sometimes working hand in hand with political elites to siphon the money out of the country in various ways, including inflating contracts, different projects and all of those things. These are challenges that we must address and talk about. Talking about foreign, African and the global market, what can we say about that? Did you know, and some of us have said that today, that the global market today for Africa has been reduced mainly to raw materials exportation, the crude oil, the minerals, all the primary products that we have today. The values are not the way they are or they should be. They are tied only to speculations by the stock market, making African economy unstable and subject to the national interests of international trading partners. African leaders continue to implement programs that serve the interests of these partners to the detriment of their citizens. This is a challenge. So my strong opinion in this presentation is that a systemic change is needed to reverse this situation, a strong systemic change. And this can only be achieved by engaging all citizens in shaping a future that promotes the common good, one that benefits everyone in Africa. And I think one critical factor we must also talk about from this platform is the culture. A whole lot of issues are cultural issues and challenges. There are cultures in Africa today, ladies and gentlemen, that aids our development. And there are cultures that also hinders our development. And we need to address these cultures. They inhibit or they impede on the development that should happen in Africa. Let's talk about these challenges. So a bold change, stand for change, is what we need right now, where we have to make the move, like the ambassador said, on changing the things that are not promoting what we should do in Africa. Like I said, change is very important. And that's number 4. Number 5 is the concept of time and energy management. Concept of time and energy management. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that there's something called the African time, which we have developed ourselves? And this in itself has not brought about development in Africa. Africans have developed their own time. No value for time, lack of a sense of value for time. When an African tells you, I will see you for 10 a.m., 10 a.m. is supposed to be 10 a.m., but 10 a.m. is whenever he or she arrives at the location. No value for time. We're so unproductive in the use of our time. It's a challenge we need to confront. In other parts of the world that we talk about, we emulate, they have discovered that time is one of your most valuable resources, a convertible resource, and it is given to every one of us in equal quantity. So that is why in Africa, we have the challenge where we love too much holidays, too much holidays. We have not come to the fact or the realization that manpower is very, very important. We need to understand it, that our productivity or wealth depends on the value of our time and the number of people working together. This is usually what is used to determine the GNP of many countries. So we must value time. This is a challenge. In Africa, we embrace and we celebrate and we don't care about even traffic and hold up. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even bother our governments or leadership, the people in charge. We have not found, lasting solution to this challenge and problem. There's a whole lot of traffic and hold up everywhere. People are stuck, trapped, stranded in traffic for 4, 5, 6 hours most times. And the sad part is that this has been on for years. And it speaks of the lack of value for time. We're not planning for the future. We must value time. Time is one of our most powerful, valuable resource if we're going to talk about development. The next challenge is education. Education. I hope lack of sound educational system. If we're going to have a cultural revolution, this must be taken so seriously. As we speak right now, there is such a dire need for education. Information, true change will only come and begins from people's mind when there is proper, accurate information and education. Ladies and gentlemen, people cannot rise beyond their level of knowledge. Africans cannot operate beyond their level of knowledge. People always rise and fall based on their level of knowledge. So we need to lift the thinking of people in our environment. This will result in the improvement and in the quality of the lives of people. We need to step up their thinking level. Information is the baseline for any kind of transformation in the entire world. Did you know that a person's life cannot be better than the quality of the information that they have? So in Africa, in our communities, we need community training, societal educations. We have to teach our people skills, required skills, technical skills, the skills that they need. No nation will be wealthier than the level of the skill of the people. No nation will be wealthier than the skill of the people. These are skills and things that are very, very important. I also think that we need to train our people to think, to be innovative. We need to teach our people to have the necessary skills. People don't think in Africa. If they do, they don't think very, very well. And I also believe that we must emphasize the preeminence of education at this time. It has to be a crusade. It has to be a crusade. Our school system needs to be so solid such that it's something that is creating entrepreneurs and job creators. And we need to create curriculums that will teach people a whole lot of things, time management, maintenance, culture, and all those things. These are things that are affecting the Africans. Now, we talk about brain drain in Africa. We are concerned about our brilliant minds and people crossing over to the developed worlds and all of that. I mean, these things, the brain drain becomes brain gain for other African countries. And it's because we are not creating the enabling environment in Africa for the people. And this has to change. So I think that the major gap and difference between the developed nation and the undeveloped one is in their mind. In their mind. And as leaders, we've got to pay attention to this. Can we talk about the issue of misunderstanding and misuse of power and authority? I mean, before I go into that, let me quickly stress some bits of the need for education. I mean, we invest a lot of money in constructions, billions of dollars, naira, in roads, in the airport and all of those things. But how much do we invest in the minds of Africans? How much does our leadership invest in the minds of Africans? It's a mindset issue. And the greatest investment we make is an investment in the thinking level of our people. This has to change. We must put in much more effort to improve the thinking level of Africans. Let me talk about the issue of misunderstanding and misuse of power and authority. This is a huge challenge. I've talked about it earlier on. I mean, in Africa, power is centralized in the hands of few people. The majority of the people are alienated from the process of governance and from government. And all of this needs to change. The challenge we have today is that people in leadership use power and authority to dominate other people. In Africa, we see leadership as being in a higher position, and it's a proof that you are more superior to everybody else. That is wrong. And in Africa, once you are promoted into leadership, it's an opportunity for people to worship you, everyone around you, including your subordinates. We have not come to understand and see leadership that it's about service and it's about the sharing of power. Did you know that in Africa, in our communities, I mean, individuals are dominated. They don't have power. They feel powerless. And that is not democracy at all. We can't really talk about democracy. People don't even feel powerful in any way. An average African feel powerless. They feel that they cannot do anything about the situation in Africa. And that is a big lie. And it's because of the structure of leadership. In Africa, one of the challenges we have is that we avoid conflict by maintaining social peace. It's a society where you don't confront elders. You don't query elders. And that's why we have the problem of maintaining status quo. This has to change. Africa is a place where there's a whole lot of preference for feasting rather than working. It's a place where there's a whole lot of pleasure. We derive more pleasure. We are interested more in pleasure. Pleasure comes first before work. Friendship comes first before business. All these are cultural issues that needs to go. Social interaction is more important to us than social development. It's a challenge. I'm stressing this because these are a whole lot of misalignment that needs to change. In Africa, in our leadership, we bend rules. The principles of organizations are adjusted because of some other people, because we don't want to expose ourselves. All this needs to be addressed. When someone is doing something wrong in Africa in leadership, we try to cover them up by saying the person is my brother, my sister. We come from the same place, the same village, the son of the soil, and we even give them some titles. These things are done, and is misunderstanding and misuse of power and authority. And the next point that I want to address is lack of appreciation for the value of human life. Lack of appreciation for the value of human life. I think if we're going to move forward in our discussion, we need to address the issue of human life. There's too much cannibalism around here in Africa. We've got to stop the killings unnecessarily. We've got to know how to treat people with tremendous respect and honor. There are so many things that we do today in Africa that demonstrates and show how cheap life is. If you look at the kind of vehicles that we have on our roads, they simply speak of coffins. The kind of smokes that comes out of those vehicles, they don't speak of value that we have on lives. If you look at our aircrafts and all of that, these are things that should be used in places that we shouldn't be mentioning here. Look at our planes that are converted today. They are cargo planes converted into aircrafts being used, where if they are talking about life jackets, you can't find a life jacket under the seat. I believe that the beginning of our wealth will be for us to place value on human life. And how do you respond to all of these things? Is the attitude that we all show from here. I think so. But having said all of these, just to, provoke our thinking, I'd like to quickly mention my recommendation at this platform. I want to suggest 5 things that I think we should pay attention to. The first one is our health system. The pandemic has revealed how vulnerable all of us are in Africa, including the entire world. And we must seize this opportunity to strengthen our health system. We must seize the opportunity to strengthen our health system. There has to be huge investment in our labs, in our clinics. These are the places, our hospitals, these are places that will form the backbone of the nation and help to respond well when it comes to anything related to COVID. We need to pay attention to our health system. My second recommendation would be for us to step up our response to the climate crisis in Africa. The catastrophic impact of this thing is so evident across the continent of Africa. In drought, in deforestation, failing crops, floods or flooding, food insecurity, competition for resources, economic losses, migrations, and all of those things. There was a time Lake Chad was the vital source of water, food, livelihood for people for centuries. Now, Lake Chad is almost gone, shrunk to 1/10 of the size that it was 60 years ago. If we look at all of these things, we have to wake up to the reality that Africa has been the one bearing these despite the responsibility that we should have. Talking about emission, let's pay attention to that. We need to reduce emission while also creating jobs and increasing access to affordable energy. We need to pay attention to that. It is a huge responsibility for us to do this because it will boost the economic competitiveness and create some supply chain resilience create jobs, and drive innovation in Africa. That's my second recommendation. The third one is for us to pay attention to build more stable and inclusive governance, inclusive and stable economic growth. What am I trying to say here? Create local jobs, support anti-corruption and transparency measures. The COVID-19 pandemic is not only a health crisis right now, but it's also an economic one. And it has shown us a whole lot of things. So we need to pay attention to this and create a whole lot of jobs. Let me move to my fourth point because of time. We need to strengthen our democracy. This is a critical thing at this moment. Authoritarianism is on the rise around the world right now. I mean, technology is being used to silence people, prosecute. Technology is being used to silence dissent and prosecute citizens all over the world. Democracies, are not working the way they should work again because of disinformation. People are not standing up for the information that they need to stand up for. People have been reduced to the misuse of the surveillance technology and so many of those things. Government is not becoming more transparent as they should be. Corruption is growing in many places. Elections right now in Africa is becoming the flashpoint for violence. And in the pandemic, it has been accelerated. So we see a whole lot of this happening in Africa. In Africa, leadership, are ignoring the term limits, rigging and postponing election and all of those things. These things needs to be looked into because we need to strengthen our democracy. Right now, many Africans are living under partial authoritarian governments. Truth be told, democracy or democratic processes is actually backsliding in Africa. And I move to my last point, ladies and gentlemen. We must advance and create lasting security and peace, which is very, very important. Having said all of this, ladies and gentlemen, like I said in my opening speech, I think all of this must be done with a transparent, sustainable, and value-driven approach. Each one of us on this platform as we proceed from this place. As I said, Africa is one of the largest, big continent with young people. And I think that the way forward and the solution for us is ultimate leadership. Ultimate leadership. Very, very important. We've mentioned all the challenges that we think, the solutions that we think, but I think if we're going to unleash the potentials of young people in Africa, create new opportunities for them to lead and to learn and to build their careers and to serve their communities and achieve their dreams in Africa, one key way forward is to operate ultimate leadership by serving other people, every one of us. And this has to cascade down to everyone. So I think that the degree that which you serve in leadership is to that same degree that your greatness will be apparent. So my charge again is that all of us on this platform today at this conference, we are either change agents or nothing else. We are either difference makers or nothing else. Our focus should be adding value to people around us in the continent of Africa. I think that the call for leadership in Africa is now. The call for leadership in Africa is now. That is the fundamental problem that must be addressed first and foremost before we go into the other issues that we're talking about. My final charge and note is this. I love what John Maxwell said. He said, leadership is influence, nothing else, nothing more. It's influence. So each one of us, we are influencing people in one way or the other. And we must step up our game in this direction. Please do not see yourself as just a statistics in Africa. You are actually a deliberate intention, creation of God to make a difference in the continent of Africa. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's build the future that young people in Africa want and they desire. And I believe that as we do this, we'll see all the necessary changes that we talked about and we're desiring, God helping every one of us. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that, Kenny. Thank you for the points that you've raised. I just want to ask you in just a few seconds, could you tackle the issue of how we could inculcate responsible leadership in all parameters of society that you've mentioned, in each and from the individual to the institutions? Could you just tackle that shortly before I go to the panelists and some of the questions that have been asked?
Thank you very much, Faith, for that. Like I said, it's false influence. You must recognize the fact that you have influence where you are right now. No matter how small it is, wherever it is, in any position you're serving, you're leading, you have influence. So whatever you can do to bring about the change, let it start from there. Then all of this will cascade and increase more to leadership and to every level of leadership. So whatever you can do, whatever you can contribute, whatever initiative you can start, whatever contribution you can make, whatever suggestion and idea and recommendation you can give to the leadership, would you start something? Never you feel that you are powerless. The problem in Africa is that Africans are timid and afraid and feel powerless. We only leave the people in leadership to assume responsibility for everything. And we think we don't have anything to contribute. So I want to say that it starts with you, it starts with me. So we should do what we can. And when we start with us, then the change, the development will spread from there. That's what I feel.
Perfect, thank you. We've got this in Africa, some of the greatest thinkers and makers of the world. So I just want to very shortly go to the ambassador. Ambassador, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Masigo, I would like to ask you, Kenya has raised a few critical points there about Africa. And, working the way you've worked, observing Africa and the world, the way you have observed it or observed her, how do we set ourselves up for success in leadership, in taking responsibility, in holding leadership accountable, in governance, in building initiatives that ultimately benefit the people, the ultimate people who really, ultimately people who need it, and then have every being in Africa benefit from that? Work for our well-being, unlock our potentials. Could I get a few sentiments from you about that?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Faith, and thank you very much, Kenny, for that comprehensive and very informative presentation. I'm very glad that you introduced the notion of culture, because in our conversation up to this stage, we had not touched on culture. And I want to see culture not necessarily as a negative. I think, yes, you mentioned that we have a culture of respect, and sometimes that hampers us when we deal with leadership and when we are trying to get accountability from leadership. I think our challenge is, how do we make our culture work for us? Because respect is not a one-way stream. It's something that is also earned. And therefore, if it is part of our culture, one way to ensure respect that would lead to more open societies and democratization is, as you also highlighted, the respect of the rights of others. That also falls under the culture of respect. So somewhere down the line, I feel that the value of our culture has been stripped away, so that our culture is seen as a hindrance, and we do not tap into the richness of our culture to really respond to the challenges of the day. And so I think the challenge that we have is to look at culture and say, how does this culture work for us? What was it that it was trying to achieve, and how can we showcase that? I go back to an example of customer service, for example. When you meet a young person treating like somebody who's visiting, and not giving them the level of customer service. Even if they're just visiting your office, they are a guest. And yet the African culture is so welcoming, is so open, is so accommodating. It will reserve the best for the guest. And yet, somehow, when we get into modern day, we believe our cultural values don't have a role to play. So I come back, Faith, to the issue of value and voice. I think we have to look for value in our systems, in our culture, in the way that we deal and we operate. And we will find that it's also rich and we have to reconnect, if you will, because somewhere down the line, if we look at the Africa that was, the Africa of the 20s and 30s, we were very glad to ditch everything that we knew and adopt the new way of doing things. And I think, just on an aside, I remember going to going to Japan one time, and I was so taken aback that here was one of the most developed countries, and yet the culture of bowing to each other, the culture of respecting when you talk to the people, was somehow still encapsulated even in the most dynamic business settings. And so the rules of the game, I think, have been defined for us, and we need to figure out how we can embrace our culture in a way that works for us. And I just want to end with this back on the theme that we also touched on earlier of accountability, governance, and leadership, because everything that we are doing should be, in terms of our own spheres of influence, the difference that we want to make is for a better society, is for a sustainable livelihoods, is for good governance, and is for upholding the dignity of the individuals with whom we engage across the board. And therefore, let's continue to draw. I take it that, yes, there are so many issues that have not gone right that we need to acknowledge and we need to respond to. But I also feel that in our kitty, there is a lot of richness that we can draw on to make the to make the leap forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Very profound. I'd like to invite my co-moderator, Tafa, who's taking questions from the chat and questions that have been asked before in the forms. Tafa, could you come in, please, with the questions? There you go.
So the first, I think the main questions that are emerging from the conversation so far are around the quality of education. Solar says the quality of education, the depth of our learning platforms, and the level of exposure that would inspire continuous learning is not up to par with our Western counterparts. What can be done to create a thirst for and stimulate learning amongst the majority and not just the rich? Tied to that question is, how can we transform or reform our education system that is tailored to us, since the one that we have at the moment is bare minimum? So it's a question around the quality of our education, the platforms, the level of exposure, and how do we create a hunger across the board and not just for the rich?
Perfect. Thank you for that. Are you there, Kenny? Could you give us your thoughts on this, about, the question of education, and which you've raised and which has come up during the discussions before and now? Just a few sentiments on that.
Right. And this is a valid point and a valid one. And this is where partnership comes in. There has to be a whole lot of collaborations with some individuals, corporate bodies, institutions that can help Africa or some of our institutions to revamp their curriculums and the rest of the things that they're doing. We need to partner with some individuals and experts and institutions to help look into our educational system, the things that we need to do to bring it at certain levels that will measure up to the standard that we expect. currently, if we look at our public schools, some of our public schools, some I say, they are not the way they should be. So all of this needs to be looked into. And it's when we connect and partner together, that's when we can do something about it. So I think when we look at the issue of partnership, like we've all been saying, that can be addressed well.
Thank you for that. I would be remiss if I didn't bring in the professor when we are talking about education.
Absolutely. Corporations are very important. It's important also, and this is valid for everyone who is dealing with education. It's not just an African issue. It's an issue for everyone worldwide. Of course, corporations are important. We learn from each other. That's very, very important. But it's also important that the governments in the African countries understand that it has to be prioritized to really invest the money in the educational system, and that it is the key point for a future success. So very often, of course, when you invest in education, you don't see the effects immediately. It takes a lot of time. And this is why very often you prefer maybe other projects. But this is the most important thing. At the end of the day, you need to decide, okay, we want to invest in education. Then it takes its time, and then it will come eventually. And all the success stories that we have seen in the past always start with investments in education. And I could imagine that this is maybe not or has not happened in the past sufficiently. Yeah, it has happened, of course, but not sufficiently if you look at Africa as in whole. The thing is, from a Western perspective, of course, we also lack corporations. It's absolutely true. Yeah, when we start having corporations, of course, in the past we had rather from Europe. We basically had in the US in mind. Now we start a little bit with corporations in Asia. But of course, Africa is still a little bit behind. I hope this is going to change, but it's of course also a little bit of a lack that we have at the moment. And maybe there are also chances to improve that. Maybe some of the governmental initiatives that we have should focus more on education than on some other issues.